The future of living, that is, we're going to talk about for the next 30 minutes about the future of living. And I'm going to do that together with Bill Bateman. And Bill works at Nuveen Real Estate as a head of European Living. And we have Neil Burton, a managing director at Round Hill Capital. Together they have, well, 45 years of experience in social housing, student housing, co-living and service apartments. Well, let's dive into the future of living, guys. Good afternoon.
Hi, Walter. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, well, real estate is about bricks, or is it about the people that live in those buildings?
Neil, you want to kick off?
Hey, Bill. Hey, Wouter. Great question. Would say, I think it's value is created really at the intersection of, people and bricks coming together. And I think, as an industry, we've largely responded to kind of macroeconomic trends of, in the residential categories where, most markets that we serve, housing is, massively undersupplied, and there is an abundant demand. That sounds like pretty kind of easy space to play in. I guess for all the folks out there who kind of looking at their underwriting, most of us wouldn't look at a deal if we didn't know, occupancy wasn't going to be 95% plus. But I think that the opportunity to create value is really looking at the needs of people far more specifically in kind of micro locations. And then feeding those insights into the development of physical product, bricks as you call them, and also the operating businesses that sit within those projects. And I think it's those two things when you think about people and their specific needs in those locations, that's the place where you can really create a lot of value.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that as Neil was alluding to, as you think about, resi as a needs-based, effectively asset class or subsector, and ultimately, we're catering to, providing shelter and thinking about those people's needs as it relates to security, as it relates to delivering, community and fostering that. And then more and more, which I know we'll get into, but thinking about what are the elements of service that kind of go above and beyond those basic kind of requirements. But, I think it fundamentally, we need to be focused on delivering what is that sort of fundamental need.
So, but why is real estate, or why is residential real estate not focused on that customer in the end? Or is that changing?
Yeah, I think from my side, historically, you've seen this divide, right, between what is hospitality and service driven and what is residential. And, there are certainly plenty of kind of market research pieces out there today that talk about bridging the gap, blurring the lines between hospitality and traditional residential. And I think, if you think about historically, what is the origin of residential real estate, it didn't really become professionalized until 25 plus years ago, with the emergence of multifamily in the States. And so prior to that, it was really mom and pops, and they had a few, maybe a large portfolio, but that sort of mentality of, providing that branded service and really meeting the needs not to say it was never there for everyone. I mean, I think that there certainly were probably people that stood above and beyond, but most of it was just about delivering kind of a basic service and using that as kind of an income driver for their needs. So, there wasn't that thinking of let's build a business and let's create scale. And by creating scale, that allows us to have effectively the infrastructure that, means that we can provide a high quality service, not only as it relates to the product, but also to, making sure that the needs are met. From a repairs and maintenance perspective, and just from, again, meeting the constant needs of the residents that are there inside of an asset.
So what is actually the barrier to not do that? Because well, the industry has changed. Well, we can do a lot for the people living in the resi buildings.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why that hasn't happened is an inherent and implicit kind of laziness from us as an industry and as professionals, because we've enjoyed this massive demand for, as Bill describes it, this fundamental human need. Yeah. Whereas if you look at our colleagues on the other side of the fence in the hospitality industry, an equivalent group of professionals are probably racking their brains right now about how to fill vacancy in those hotel rooms. Yes, it's accommodation, but it doesn't fulfill that kind of primary need that Bill was talking about. So, for all those folks with empty hotels, I think they're massively focused, on customer need right now. How can they speak to the customer and about those primary needs of kind of safety? That people need to know that's delivered on, to go book a hotel room. So I think there are very different drivers. We shouldn't assume that hospitality is accommodation and residential is accommodation. They're very different because one is a permanent place or semi-permanent place of shelter, and the other caters to something entirely different. So the characteristics of the hospitality space are that are actually inverse. You've got an incredible supply of hotel rooms, and especially right now, a lack of demand. So that forces owners and operators to really have to compete on the quality of their product and service, to capture that market share of customers. And that's not something that we've had to attend to, really in the resi space. I think the call to action for us is it's often, those adjacent verticals that see that opportunity before, the incumbents see it themselves. So, if you were Marriott Properties right now, and I know they have probably 4,000 or 5,000 long stay hotel, or apartment rooms, would you be thinking about leveraging your service capabilities to deliver more long stay product? I would, if I was Marriott, because I got a lot of kind of vacant or redundant business hotel properties in locations that could be converted. So I think the call to action for all of us in kind of traditional resi is Bill's a colleague and a compatriot, not so much my competitor. I think we should be fearing Mr. and Mrs. Marriott more than each other.
Yeah, but how is so we were probably building all those bricks to really deliver on that demand side, deliver on what the people needed. But how is technology making this change probably possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And you have the harder side of infrastructure, right? The bricks and the fit out, and then you have what is becoming more and more relevant, and that's the question, the kind of softer side of that infrastructure, which is generally digital, and in some cases there's a hardware component as well. But it is more and more important, and I think that Neil and I share the passion for understanding and the need to continuously be looking at how we integrate that into our proposition as owners and operators of real estate. And I think if you go to the point that Neil and I both touched on in terms of experience, we're trying to deliver a fundamental experience for the tenant, which is security and providing safety and a good place to live at the right price. But more and more, we're able to go above and beyond that and layer on other additional services, which provide that better experience and that make us stand out from the crowd and be perceived as the good landlord that doesn't just change the light bulbs and fix the faucets, but we do other things to drive, again, that community engagement, or to think about what is a better way to live in a space. And I think technology is opening doors, and obviously we don't have time even in the day to look at all of the different facets by which technology is changing this, but it is and whether that's on the kind of the user journey as it relates to booking or the the ability to engage with your landlord in an efficient way. So those are just some of the elements that I think are more superficial. But then also as a landlord, right, from an operator perspective, I think Neil looks at that as like, well, I can reduce OpEx, right? I can, if I layer on the right tech stack and make my assets more efficient, I can create a better scaled portfolio and reduce some of my costs. And so I think just thinking about how all of these interplay, to benefit not only the tenant but also the landlord to some extent is important.
Yeah, building on that, I think one of the kind of roles that people like Bill and I play is, within our respective firms, there are a lot of kind of different disciplines collaborating together to create value. And on this idea of customer or experience, you can almost kind of look at one side of the room, exit stage right. This isn't for us. This is a kind of operational matter. But coming back to the influence of technology and building on what Bill said, I think the change in the purchase consumption cycle of customers looking for a place to live presents a huge opportunity to increase your kind of nettable, rentable area by removing office space and leasing offices from buildings. And if you look at a lot of legacy products in North America, where we take so much inspiration, many of those buildings have very, very significant leasing offices on the ground floor areas, throughout the building, dedicated to kind of back office people, when now the customer is expecting a leasing experience online. So that's why our development and investment colleagues should care about specifically who the customer is, how they're consuming products and leasing with us, and also how they go on to kind of live a meaningful life in our communities. It's about the efficient use of space. It's about that minimization of OpEx. If I can take out a leasing office, that means I can take out a leasing professional, and that makes that project more valuable. So I think this idea of experience and customer specificity as a driver of value is something that the multiple disciplines within our industry should all care about.
Okay, but is it also about creating communities within those buildings, besides that experience?
Yeah, I think the idea of community, gives the idea of a kind of collective, tribe of people sitting around the campfire with all the same beliefs and values. And I don't think that's, pluralistic enough definition of community. I think community, building needs to deliver to a basic set of needs, some of which Bill talked about earlier on in terms of kind of safety, access. But in the research that I'd previously done with Greystar in North America, one of the things that was important for people living in multifamily buildings was the ability to express themselves as individuals within that community.
Okay.
And I think if you think about a more kind of traditional view of tribe, yes, there are a shared set of values, but each person within that tribe has a distinctive role that they're recognized for, whether it be carer, warrior. And I think within communities, at the moment, we're kind of at a very nascent stage where we talk about community as this kind of idealized view of everyone, singing Kumbaya around the campfire, when actually, community is made up by individuals, their different aspirations and motivations, and it's about bringing all of that together in one place that really creates value.
Yeah, how do you see that, Bill?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that community is certainly over the last couple of years been a buzzword that a lot of people like to implement, and not always do people understand what it means. I think Neil's in a fortunate position to be able to kind of get under the kind of look at the roots of it and understand what it means and how to really bring it to life. I think there are really good operators that have thought through it and are looking to drive value proposition that is fulfilling to these individuals, right, and provides them with a place that feels like home, right? And I think different, and certainly as you look at different subsectors, there's some that maybe cater more to community than others. And certainly some of the very old legacy buildings that don't have maybe spaces for interaction, it's then harder to kind of foment that additional community. I think more and more of this next generational assets, as you look at co-living or some of these amenitized multifamily and build to rent assets are thinking about that. But it's not enough just to build a space, right? You can't just say, well, here we have this community space. You need to be, as an operator, you need to be on the front foot to think about, well, how do I engage and how do I promote interaction and how do I meet the needs of others without that feeling disingenuine? And I think that's where it becomes quite tricky. And again, some do it well and others do it poorly. But I do think that, as we think about, and I know this is probably a point that we'll touch on later, but, as we think about where people are today in the back of the pandemic, many, have kind of lost a sense or a yearning for more community. And I think some of the buildings that have had that sort of community already built in as a core component to its DNA and its kind of circulatory system are the ones that are outperforming, and where you see a certain level of kind of marginal or incremental happiness vis-a-vis others. So I do think that it's important to consider. It is not always easy to achieve.
So if it's not easy, what is the best way, or what are your tips and tricks for other real estate professionals? What should they do? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think I break things down into, all right, what physical features of the building impact the acquisition metrics. So if I have a pool on the roof, this will be a key marketing tool, and my asset will likely outperform one without a pool on the roof, right? So I will see an increased speed of absorption to the asset, perhaps higher rents for people when they come into the building. But a lot of that kind of physical infrastructure around amenitization that's so useful in kind of driving acquisition isn't always as useful at the softer metrics of retention, minimizing attrition, increasing net promoter score, which in themselves have enormous economic value. In that if your churn level is lower, then you have a lower marketing budget. You'll have more organic traffic coming to your asset because it has a sense of place in that that environment that people are willing to recommend it. So I think that there are metrics to the acquisition phase that obviously are can be very close to features of real estate. And there are softer metrics that relate to community, but they shouldn't be overlooked because they're as economically important.
And how about the ESGs are getting more and more important, of course, and the S of ESGs is standing for social, of course. How do we put input? How do we give input on the S?
Yeah, that's a big focus of ours at Nuveen. We definitely are putting ESG front and center, and I think you're right to differentiate between the E and the S. I think every time, generally people associate or overweight the E versus the S, but as we've alluded to in previous kind of questions and answers here, the S is fundamental to residential and living. And I think we've just touched on one that's important, obviously the community bit, and to the extent that you can measure that sort of interactivity between tenants and some sort of health meter to look and see how happy people are, and gauge that and try to promote additional ways to promote that sort of interaction. I think is important, and that can be through events. And it could be through other means, and I'm sure Neil has some ideas. The other, I think, is if you think about levels of affordability and trying to cater to the not always looking, which is tough. Like I think we're always if we have a well-positioned asset and we're always trying to ramp up rents and kind of grow, align with market, which is obviously partly our job, but it's also partly our job to be understanding of kind of what people are going through. So I think a lot of what we do as we invest is looking at what are the affordability levels of these assets, and making sure that we're able to kind of bring a product to market that caters to, you know, what are maybe perceived as more, you know, key workers and gray collar workers.
Yeah, I think you know, on the Roundhill side, you know, our development management group spend a lot of time, you know, thinking about kind of unit mix. But even within a unit mix, and you know, kind of favorite debate area is, you know, the 2-bed apartment. If you think about kind of relative affordability, I'm kind of doing some work in the Iberian Peninsula at the moment, and you know, legacy product there can be upwards of 50 square meters. You know, it's poorly designed. You know, there's an opportunity for kind of smaller sizing but better design that, you know, actually amplifies all of the kind of elements that someone needs to kind of account for in their lives. You know, most recently, you know, home working is an example. Actually in a smaller space. And from a sustainability perspective, there's a number of kind of opportunities there that kind of minimize the footprint of an individual in a building, but to Bill's point around affordability, you know, can actually be more affordable because of better design. And they're, you know, equivalent products at 50 square meters, you might be able to do within, you know, 30 to 35 because of good design. You know, the 2-bedroom debate we have a lot. And obviously there's, you know, different, you know, planning environments around Europe. But, you know, some of those environments you're kind of mandated on your unit mix. You know, there's less flexibility than there perhaps is in North America. Thinking, well, who is this 2-bed unit for, and determining whether that be for, you know, a couple or sharers is a big call. And, you know, my view is that the kind of most defensible product is, you know, a 2-bed unit with bed bath parity, because that can flex to, you know, a young couple, perhaps with a child, but also, you know, Bill and I, who are sharers in a market, we don't particularly want to compete over the master with the ensuite. So I think, you know, there's lots of kind of thoughtful approaches, you know, that really need to happen much earlier in that design phase that help create the S in the ESG.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, of course, well, you mentioned a little bit of affordability. That's probably a major topic right now. How can we, well, give something? How is it possible to do a good job on affordability? Maybe that's the best answer of a question that I can answer.
I think being conscious of it, right? I think Neil brings up a good point, and you know, as we look at, no, there are two approaches, right? I mean, on one hand, I think a lot of what's happening across Europe is to build the supply or to provide the supply that's needed to meet the demand you're needing to build new stock, right? And
materials getting more important, more
materials
expensive.
Can be, yeah. So you start thinking about I mean, as we see, right, materials both over here in Europe and the UK, as well as in the States. You know, construction costs are skyrocketing, and then, you know, then we need to, you know, land prices are increasing, and that's putting a lot of pressure. How do you provide kind of a noble place to live, right? Like we don't, I appreciate, and I'm a believer in elements of co-living, but it's not for everyone. It's not for, you know, kind of every cohort. So I think part of it, as Neil alludes to, is in design. There's another element, which is as you look at existing stock, right? What's happening today is maybe that you have this shift of mindset. And one thing that we've done in the States is partnered with Common, who's kind of a leading multifamily, next generation multifamily operator that in many cases is also perceived as a co-living operator. But they've taken an approach similar to what Neil described, which is, well, let's actually think about almost retrofitting one of these more legacy multifamily assets such that you can have multiple professionals in a 3 or 4 bedroom that have the right sort of amenity set and the right service provision. But ultimately what that does is it means that if you look at the affordability on a per room basis, it's much better than, you know, looking at it across, you know, like what would a family pay if they were living in that. So I think trying to break it down and sometimes it requires creative approaches to think about, you know, because it's not straightforward. And I think, you know, what we spend time on, and I know what Neil and team spend time on, is how do we marry or balance that need to outperform in terms of, you know, the responsibility that we have to our investors, but also be cognizant and very much driven by the affordability needs across the region.
Yeah, Bill, I think one thing that could help, you know, I kind of referenced the kind of verticals within our businesses, and many of them speak completely different languages. You know, the language of an operator, a development manager, an investment manager are very different. I think a pluralistic set of metrics and, you know, some kind of language skills across the disciplines is really important. And specific to this point would be that, you know, a customer thinks in terms of, you know, rental impact to their, you know, net take-home pay. And most of the time we're talking about the square foot values, which are completely alien to them, right?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, holding both of those metrics in one's mind, you know, as you make key decisions, kind of places, you know, when I talk about customer, I'm not just talking about resident, I'm talking about clients like Bill. You know, how does he think about it? You know, he may think about it in the square foot values, but I have to then create operating solutions that think about someone paying, you know, 20, 30% of their, you know, gross household income as rent. And those are different ways to thinking about it. So I think a pluralistic approach to metrics is helpful.
So, well, Bill, you touched on the impact of the pandemic a little bit, but Neil, how is your view on that? Real estate or residential real estate is, of course, an important asset class. What is the impact of the pandemic?
You know, there's probably a, you know, laundry list of things that people out there can kind of tick off as I speak, but, you know, certainly the impact of, you know, home working. I'm doing a lot of research on pet ownership at the moment.
Okay, yeah, that's increasing. Yeah.
Skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And also I think, you know, from a European perspective, how ill-equipped buildings are to cope with that increase in pet ownership. You know, in the private rental space, you know, often pets aren't allowed, or there are kind of punitive pet rents in place so that people don't have pets. But clearly, as we're all spending more time at home, you know, you've seen the impact of, you know, certainly the kind of 25 to 35 age group, you know, owning more pets. But there's a lot of operational intensity that goes into that. And I think that's where, you know, one can look at the multifamily buildings in North America who have, you know, very sophisticated ways of not just designing in for pets where there aren't many green spaces in downtown areas, but also, you know, it's the other things that one needs to think about in terms of kind of dog wash stations, dog parks, you know, within a building. Probably an alien concept to most people on the phone, but go check it out. And that creates the opportunity to, you know, introduce things like pet rent, which of course amplify, you know, what people are paying. Pets create a sense of community. If you're in a pet-friendly building and it's working, you're less likely to leave. Therefore, you're retained longer. So I think I could talk about home working a lot, but like pets is the thing top of mind, because I think that can really create a competitive advantage for an institutional owned and managed property, because our real competition is, you know, in most markets is the private landlord, who just can't cater for that kind of demand.
Okay, last question, and maybe a short answer, Bill. How will people live in the future?
It's a very loaded question for the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously there are, you know, a lot of different ideas of what the future entails, and that can be the immediate future in the next 5 years or, you know, 50 years. I think, you know, as you look at the pandemic, and what does that mean? Does that mean that we look for more decentralization and the ability to have more space and have more pets? And, you know, maybe we're not working in the office as much, so it's 1 or 2 days in, so we're willing to trade and have a longer commute. that's one thing that we're certainly looking into. I don't think that, we for sure do not believe that the city and kind of the innovation and the job creation, what it's represented historically is going away. We still very much believe in urbanization, but there could be a bit of this sort of bifurcation in terms of, people moving slightly more outside. And the other point that's tied to that is you say, well, commuter times are slightly longer, but there's a lot of technology that's developing behind the scenes that can change that in a relatively short amount of time. And I think oftentimes we think of the Jetsons and the flying cars from Back to the Future and say that's so far off, but really there's a lot of development. Yeah, it's coming, it's imminent. And Hyperloop, all of that in the next 10 years will massively change, and that will change the fabric, kind of the urban fabric, and what that means for cities and where maybe we demand to live as consumers and kind of in homeowners or renters. And then also I think importantly, as we think about ESG and the impact and I think now the buy-in from end consumers, as we continually understand the pending kind of, imminent doom scenario whereby, we've ravaged the planet, we need to be thoughtful and demand better solutions. And that comes from materials. It also comes from creating circular communities, on-site energy production, vertical farming, all of these things that, we hear a lot about, but it hasn't really become real as far as most of us know. But the tech is there, and I think it can all start coming together, these converging technologies, quite quickly, to the extent that I think the future is, it is fast approaching, really. And I, for one, hope that, really soon we're talking about, viable solutions, such that, myself or Neil, like we're in a position to really back those and support the growth of them, to contribute positively to the world. Well,
that's an amazing conclusion, probably, and a lot is coming our way. That's for sure. Well, we keep looking to all the developments that you will bring to the market as Roundhill and Nuveen Real Estate. So thank you very much for being with us today, Neil and Bill, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Walter.
Thanks,
Walter. Everyone. Bye.
Bye.